and welcome again to IJS online edition of IJS London. Our next talk will target the topic of Angular again. As you have heard already today, we don't just have one talk on Angular in our program, but a full range of topics. So please feel free to use the chat to exchange and to ask questions throughout this talk again too. And for now, please let me introduce you to Fabian Gosebrink, who will talk about Angular forms. Hi, Fabian.
Hey.
Have fun with your talk.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to share my screen now. So I hope everybody can see something. So I welcome you to my talk, Enrich Your Angular Apps with Angular Forms. I'm very excited about this one. I've been in touch with forms a lot lately, so this is how the idea for this talk came up, basically, and I just was overwhelmed by the power of the API which Angular Forms has. So I thought in the next 45 minutes, we will get in touch with Angular Forms, how we can start with forms. We will do from the ground up what the Forms API does provide us. And then we will get into more complex scenarios where we can just take the Angular Forms and solve specific problems. And maybe you will find yourself or some use case you had inside of that slides I've prepared. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will look in the chat after this talk, and then we can have just exchange a few words. I would really like that. So the next 45 minutes, like I said, let's look about how you can enrich your Angular apps with Angular Forms. But before we start technically how we can do this, I would like to start with the why. Why should we pay attention to Angular Forms or forms in general that much, right? So forms is always a little bit complicated when it comes to this because from a user perspective, it is the first time the user has to work on your site, right? So normally he is clicking on your site and doing the things and doing whatever he wants to and getting the information by just reading them. But you should pay attention to forms because the user for the first time has to take the hand of the mouse and just type something in, maybe typing in the correct email address or typing in the correct telephone number, which can be pretty cumbersome if you have explored that in your applications, right? So this is something where we have to pay attention to make it as comfortable as we can make it for users, just to provide us some data, right? And the second point is you should pay attention to forms because this is the point where the user can give you information which you might persist inside of your database. Right, and this is why we're building web services, and this is why we're having databases, because the users can store something behind it, and you want to validate the data on the back end for sure. And the front end, it would be nice if the user would see what is wrong, basically. And this can be very cumbersome to validate the data which are coming from the user, and you persist them. So you have to secure yourself not to store any garbage or malicious information even, right? So therefore you should pay a lot of attention to forms when it comes to that. And Angular Forms in specific provide a very good way when it comes to validation and to make it as easy for us as developers and as comfortable as it can be for the users when it comes to forms. When you started with Angular Forms, you have you have to choose between template forms and reactive forms. So these are the two ways Angular provides you. Template forms, as you can guess, is more template driven. So what you do is you design your forms inside of the template, and you have some directives which just synchronize it with a component property, and then your information get written in there. So basically that's more template driven. The better approach, in my opinion, the better approach and the easier approach is the reactive forms approach, which we will take a look at today. So with reactive forms, we are designing our forms inside of a model, inside of a component, and then we reflect it in the UI. So it's a little bit the other way around. And the API we have is, like I said, very rich. It's very easy to use, and we have a kind of flexibility what we can do with the forms, because most of the forms we have in today's use cases are a little bit more than just like a first name, last name or something. So they can change. You know, they are dynamic. You have to add controls, you have to remove controls, you have to like cross-validate or something. And this is where reactive forms really, really shine, in my opinion. And what you shouldn't do is like mix them up. So you shouldn't do template forms and reactive forms, not inside of one component. And I wouldn't consider it like inside the application. They're template forms and another component with reactive forms. So don't mix that up. Choose one way or the other and drive with it if you can. Before you start working with reactive forms, you have to pay attention to include the module, of course. So what you have to do is inside your module, you have to import the reactive forms module, which comes from Angular Forms. And of course, we have to add it to the imports array to make it accessible for our Angular application, right? So this is just the ECMAScript 6 import to have the type, and everything which the module exports is getting imported here in the imports array. So after this, our Angular application is ready to work with reactive forms. So we can start ahead. And when you read a little bit about reactive forms, and when you just read tutorials or Angular IO documentation, you will stumble upon a word which is pretty much used inside of, and when they're talking about reactive forms in the documentation, which is abstract control. So the abstract control is basically like a base class where other classes inherit from, right? It's an abstract class, as you can guess. So the abstract class, abstract control, is also coming from the Angular Forms namespace. And basically this is where everything is like built upon, right? So we have 3 different classes which directly inherit from that base class, from that abstract control, which is FormControl, FormGroup, and FormArray. And I was pretty confused when I started, like, what is what exactly, and what can we use for which use case and stuff like that. So this is why I would like to drop in those 3 controls, or FormControl, FormGroup, and FormArray a little bit in specific. So let's take the FormControl first, right? So FormControl is like the smallest thing you can use if you want to work with reactive forms, right? So it's the smallest thing. It's like a glue between your component and like an HTML5 input. So what we have to do is we have to import the form control if we want to instantiate a new one, of course. And inside of our template, you can use like a normal input HTML5 tag, and you can put the form control directive on it. And what we're doing is we're binding it. We're using data binding it to a property called name. And the name property is a new instance of a form control, right? So we're saying new form control, and the form control itself is like the glue between that HTML5 input element and the property on that app component in that case. So right, it just kind of glues them together. And because of that, we told Angular now, dear Angular, please pay attention to what's happening in that input, and please reflect it into my name property. And then you can use the whole API which the form control provides you. So you're hooked into it, and now you can just enrich it with the API, the form control, or the abstract form, the abstract control base class provides you, which is like, for example, the status, or the value, or the errors of that specific form control. So this is all, these properties are all coming from the form control or from the abstract control, and they're getting filled automatically from the reactive forms. So the status can be there, which is valid or invalid or pending. We have the value, just what the user typed in there if you want to send it anywhere. Or you can take a look at the errors, which are now no errors now because we don't have any validation in this example, but we will take a look at this. So this is all coming from the form control class, and you don't have to do anything from this but instantiate like the new form control. So this is really, really interesting. But status, value, and errors are not the only properties you have when you're working with a form control. There are a lot more, right? You have the value, which just reflects the value. We have the status saying if it's valid or invalid. You can separately ask for valid and invalid. We have pending, disabled, and enabled. You can take a look at the errors, which are validation errors if there are some errors, or null if everything is okay. You can check whether the form is pristine, dirty, touched, or untouched, right? So which state this form control, this specific form control has. And which I find very interesting, we have observables, so streams of events, which emit when the value changes or the status changes. So the value changes could be like a good use case if you just have a search bar in the header of your application and somebody searches something and you want to react to the value change, and then you want to fire an HTTP request, right? And just search something and just give some proposals of what the user can do, what the user can select now inside of your page, or like blog post or something. So the value changes is a programmatically observable where you can just hook in, where you can subscribe to and just get the values out of what the user typed in. You can do everything you want with it, from all the RxJS operators like delay, you can do distinct until change, and so on and so forth. So you're completely flexible there. It's just an observable event which emits the values when they're changing. All right, so this is a form control. Let's go to the form group. So the form group is the next one we will take a look at. The form group basically is nothing else than a container for some form controls or for some form groups itself, which is called nested groups. So what you can do is you can create a new form group and you can put form controls, form groups, and even form arrays in there. And then it gets serialized as an object and you can work with that object. And it's very, very important to always reflect in your mind that the form group is nothing else than a JavaScript object. It's just a plain object where we are working with, and which we can modify when we're typing something into our inputs, right? And as an example, I've got a small form group here. So first of all, we have to import the form group if we want to instantiate a new form group, of course. And then we have the form group directive as well. And what we're doing is we're binding to that form a form group directive, and we're binding to it a property called myFormGroup. And we can also use the ng-submit event, which is coming from a form. The ng-submit event is automatically handling the emit event, which is coming from HTML5, which is like submitting your form. It is just dealing with it. It's just swallowing it, and then it uses the normal Angular way to submit your form. So you should always stick to the ng-submit. So we are calling a method here, which is onSubmit, just to get the values out of a form, basically. Then we have an input, and here we're using the directive FormControl name. And here we're passing the name of the property, which describes the form control inside of a form group. So now we're not using the form control directive because we're not referring to a form control instance, but we are referring to a form control name, which is called first name. And here you can see in the class app component that we have a public property, myFormGroup, which is a new instance of form group, and we're passing it in the constructor just a configuration object, which has the property first name, which is basically a new form control, right? So here we have a nested form control inside of a form group, and the onSubmit method is just console logging out from that form group. Please get me my form control, which is first name. And here you can see also an API which the form group gives you, like the get, and then you can access all the controls by name if you want to. You can iterate over the controls and so on and so forth. So all of that, plus what we are knowing from the form control, is provided by the form group as well. If you want to put your forms a little bit more dynamic, you have like a methods on that form group, like a register control. You can add controls, you can remove controls, or set control, which is basically updating a control. So all of these methods are provided, and you can like add a control with that specific name and that specific value. You can remove control by name, you can register new controls, and so on and so forth. So this is a pretty dynamic and pretty a nice API to work with, right? You can use things like set value, patch value, or reset. So set value or patch value are often used when you have like a form and you're passing data into that component because you want to like edit an existing user or something. So you pass in the first name with the last name, and with set value or patch value, you can set values inside the complete form. You're just passing an object which has the same properties with the filled out values, and then your form gets updated. Or patch value is just referring to a single form control when you just want to patch a single value of that form. If you're calling reset on a form, it just will be get resetted to like empty strings or null, whatever your type is behind that form group. So these are pretty mighty and a pretty nice API. If you want to return to the value of the form, so basically what you're sending maybe back to the server, which you're working with in the end, you can refer to the method getRawValue. And what FormGroup.getRawValue is, it is just reflecting your form as like a raw value as a JSON object, right? So you get an object, and there's the first name, Obi-Wan, and the last name, which is Kenobi. Please pay attention to getRawValue, please, because getRawValue is not paying attention to disabled properties. So disabled properties are always included here. It doesn't look at if it's disabled or not. If you want to refer to the like real value of your Angular form, you can always refer to the value property, which we have seen from the FormControl. Also here it's available, and it is paying respect to the disabled properties, right? So you can use either or. Sometimes I use for debugging purposes, I get the raw value, but most of the time I'm getting the value. And this is a pretty nice way to get what's into your form, right? Again, you have a lot of properties where you can access. I won't go to them in detail because they are slightly the same, but again, you have all the values, all the properties as in FormControl, because they're coming from that abstract control, like a value status, invalid and valid. A form group is always valid when all of its childs are valid. So this can be form groups or form controls. The same with invalid, and it's pending if one of those controls are pending, and so on and so forth. So it just summarizes, like I said, as a container, what's inside of it, and accumulates the values to the form group and sets it accordingly. So basically, that's a pretty nice and mighty thing. You can also disable your button if your form is like valid or not. So it's a pretty nice way Angular gave us that we can hook into every HTML5 property, which is disabled in this case. This is coming from HTML5, and we can just bind to it myForm.invalid, right? So now the button would be disabled if my form is invalid, but be careful doing it that way, because that invalid is not paying attention to like state which is pending, right? So this button is only disabled if the my form is invalid. If it's pending, the button would be enabled. So it would be is recommended just to do it like not form valid, which you see basically more often, and then the button is also disabled if the form is pending. So just if you have asynchronous validation and you just like want to check if this email address is already taken or not, you're sending an HTTP request and then you're coming back. So this would be a pending state of your form, and you don't want to be the button enabled when you're like asking for something in the background. Let's take a look at a small demo I want to show you, and I have a small stack blitz here, and I hope you can see it. I'm just making it a little bit bigger. I hope this is all right. We have here is, let me just open that up, console here. You can see the console on the right-hand side. Here on the right-hand top side, we have like an input and a send button. And what we just did is we have a form group here where we bind to a property myFormGroup. We have a form control, and we're console logging out myForm.value. And the form group, like I said, is serialized as an object. So if we go to send here, you can see that we have an object with the property first name, which is exactly this one here, and it has nothing in it. So right, we can just type something in here. If we send it, you can see that you get an object representation of what you basically sent typed into that input property. That is pretty cool. What we can do now is we can add another control, which is first name. We can do last name here, which is another form control, and then we have to enhance our template as well. So we do last name here. We save that whole thing, and then we have first name and last name. We can type something here. Let's say Obi-Wan, and this is Kenobi. And we have send, and you can see that we have the object representation of those two values. You can now like validate them and send them above. But also, let's check the API. Let's check myFormGroup.status, and let's do that in a JSON. We can ask for the value it saved through a JSON pipe, and we can take a look at the errors, which is null because everything is okay. So you can see it here. So the status is valid. Let me put a break here. So there you go. We can see if it's valid, its value is first name, last name, and the errors are null. But as we type, you can see that the form group is updated. And there you can see, we can see obi1 and Kenobi. This is good for debugging purposes. If you want to take a look what's inside of your form, what am I sending back, or if the form is valid or not, you can always just JSON them out with a JSON pipe, and then you see what is going on. I use that a lot, basically. So now, instead of a form group, let's add a form control, my form control, which is just new form control. So you don't have to work with a form tag all the way. You just can do a new form control here, and then we can do an input tag here. And we just now use, so that's for my form control. We're using the form control directive now, and we're using my form control now. And now we're working without a form property, without the form tag, I mean, here with the HTML5 thing. So just with an input here. So you don't always need that form thing if you want to work with Angular forms. Like if you have just a search bar or something, this could be your way to go. What we can do, we can console log out also the my form control value, because it's the same abstract control API. And when we are clicking on that send button, we just putting the value out. Here's something here, and then you can see we're putting first name, last name, which is this form, which is empty. And we have that not as an object representation here, but just as a string that we are referring to that form control here. So that's a pretty nice thing to do. What we also can do is we can instantiate, and we'll just get rid of that, get rid of that again, get rid of that again. If you're passing some values inside of that component, what you can do is you can instantiate it with the values and up front. So what we can do is we can do an obi1 here, and then we can do a Kenobi here. And there you can decide if the object you're passing in has some values, then you put them into your form. Otherwise, it's null or an empty string. And then you can see and can pre-fill the values, and you can just edit them and not creating a new like customer or something else. Right. So this is pretty mighty and a pretty nice thing. All right. Let's switch back to our application, to our presentation. And let's talk about a form builder, because that was something which really confused me in the beginning as well. So there was all the constructors with new form group, new form control, and stuff like that. And Angular came up with a more convenient way to create forms, which is called the form builder. And the form builder basically is nothing else than a service which we can inject. So what we can do is we can inject the form builder here from Angular Forms. We can import it from Angular Forms. The template stays completely the same if you're working with a form builder, but we inject it this time. We say private FB is a form builder, and then we refer to the form group. This is my form group, fb.group. So we can do .group, .control, .array, and we can, instead of newing something up, we can just use the service to say fb.group. First name is null in that case. And of course, the form group has to be a value which we can bind to, then our template stays completely the same. And here's a slight comparison between on the left-hand side when we do new form group, new form control all the way. So this is convenient when you're doing when you have small forms, but when it gets to complexity and in most business cases, in most business apps, the cases and forms are really complex, then it's better to use, or it's more convenient. It's easier to see when using the form builder .group, and then you instantiate your groups, right? So let's take a short look at the demo we just had. What we can do is we can just import the form builder here, form builder. We can inject it in the constructor. Let's do it like that. So private FB's form builder, and like that. And my form group is, we can say my form group is of type form group, and we can just comment that out and say this dot my form group equals fb.group, and we're passing in just form control, And the form control is, so form group, and the form control has first name. Let's just control the first name, which is an empty string in that case. We just do not refer with the last name. There you go. So basically, this is it. This is more convenient. It's easier to write if you're working with Angular Forms. Let's save that. Let's see if it still works. Just typing in here something, and then you have it, right? So the form builder is easily injected. But you can choose whatever you like. In my opinion, this is easier to read, basically. All right, let's go back to our presentation. Last but not least, we have the form array. We did not skip that. So the form array basically is very, very convenient and very cool if you're working with dynamic forms. I had a lot of customers working with dynamic forms, which have like just the criteria where they want to dynamically add and remove form controls on runtime. Right, so you're adding something, you're removing something, maybe something else gets visible and has to get rid out of your form. And the form array gives you that kind of flexibility better than the form group. So the form array is just an array of form controls. It can be form groups, can be form controls, and it is for the dynamic purpose. So if you want to add and remove and replace something inside of a form, it's probably better to use the form array because it behaves like an array, and it is as easy as just remove and add items to an array and doing the same just with form controls. So this is a pretty cool way. You can iterate over the controls better, right? So because it's just an array, and you can just loop over it and get to all your controls, which you can do, of course, with the form group as well, but the form group is an object. So you have to do that object entries, and then you can refer to the controls. And with an array, this is easier, so it's less code, you can see it better. And it gets serialized as an array in this time and not as an object, which we have with the form group, basically. So here is a small example of how we can work with a form array, which is wrapped in a form group. So what we have here is we have a form group and we have a form array. Of course, the form array has also to be imported from Angular Forms. After that, we can instantiate that form array with the form builder again. So we say form array, and inside of that array, now we're not passing an object, but we are passing a new form control. And you can see we do not give that form array, like that array inside, like a property name and say new form control, but this is just an array and we can place the controls in there, right? So we have a new form control here inside of that array, and then we're doing a new form group, which has a property called my form array, and we're just hanging in the form array we just did, basically. So, and in our template, then we have the form tag, and we're putting the form group on it, binding to the my form group, and then we have the my form array name, which is referring to the form array. And then we're just iterating over the controls, getting the index, and as form control name, we're giving the number of the specific form control name. So this is pretty nice to work with, because now you can just remove and you can just add form controls, and they will easily be reflected inside your UI. So I would like to refer to a demo, but we will shortly take a look at this because I think we are running out of time, not really, but so there you go. You can see the stack blitz here with the example we have just seen, and hopefully the dev server is coming up. And here you can see we have a new form control inside of that form array. We can send it now, we can fill something in, we can send it, and you can see that we're giving an object, which is the form group, and inside of that group is my form array property, which is an array. And now we don't have a specific property name, but just a 0, which is the index. We're typing something in. We can add a new control now, just basically a comma separated list here. It's just an array. And now we have 2 form controls. If we fill them out, let's do ob1 and kenobi here. We can send it, and now you have like 2 arrays, 2 array items here, 1 array. We can also do like a button outside of that form. We can do, well, let's do it here. Inside of a form, we can do a button and closing tag. a button here, and we will set it to the type equals button, because it should not submit the form. The default type is form. And when it got clicked, I want to add form control and add control here. So here we are doing the method add form control. We can add form controls at runtime. So we can basically this form array, and we can use the arrow function, the array function push with a new form control. And we can say, hey, just add it. Right, so now we have two controls in here. These are those which are added initially. Then we can add a new control, and then we have added a new control at runtime. And if we just add more and more and more and more and more, then we can send it, and you can see that we have like 9 form controls. So this is pretty easy without being worried about when it's got rendered and when things are really being updated in the view and stuff like that. So a form array is really convenient if we want to add or remove form controls from a form at runtime, basically. So this is a pretty nice thing. All right. What I also see a lot is that we have at a customer's project is that we have like form groups which we want to completely pass into a component, and that component is taking care of stripping out the form group and displaying it, right? This comes in mind when you think of presentation and container components which you're working with. So the form array also offers you the possibility to add a form group inside of that form array, which you can then pass down to your component. You don't have to display it in the ng4 loop directly. So we have a form array here, form builder array, and we do an array, and the inside of this is a new form group where all our controls are in. And maybe if you have always the same or something, you can just put that inside of a component. Here we're just wrapping it in a group with my form array, and then we have that form again. We are reacting on the submit, and then we are looping over all the controls, which is a form group now. And then inside of your component, you can just bind to that form group and just pass it in, right? So it could be like an input parameter inside of my -comp, and then you're getting a form group from the outside. And at the top level component, you're just reflecting whether the thing is invalid or not, and you can loop over it. So this makes your forms also very dynamically with splitting it into different components if you have like big forms. So this is a very good way to do it. Let's talk about validation. We just talked about if it's valid or not. So let's dive into validation a bit. Things are really getting interesting when we're starting with validation, right? So validation is basically just telling a form control, setting the valid property if it's valid or not. Basically, this is what we're interested in. And we can do that with the form builder group. We have seen that we're passing in the object, right? And now we're just passing in the object and fill it with a pre-filled value, but as an array. And as a second parameter in the array, we can pass the validators, which are coming from Angular forms as well. So the built-in validators are simply as that added to your form control. We have to import them. And after them, we just have to give them as a static class, and we do validators.required, and then the error tags automatically added to that specific form control. So right now, first name, last name, age, and room are all required, and the error property is filled automatically. Right, and there's not only the required validator, which is coming from Angular natively, but we also have like min, max. We have required true emails, min lengths, max lengths, pattern, null validator, and all the kind of stuff where you can work with. And what Angular does behind the scenes is it adds from that validator the required or the property which is failing to the errors property, right? So your control with the control name in that case, so your form has a control, you're getting the control name, and the errors property gets filled automatically with the specific validator you put in. So if you have the required validator, you have a property which is called errors.required. If you have the min length or the max length property on it, you have a property on that errors property which is called min length and max length. And this makes it very easy for us to see which error is on there and display error messages, basically. So this is also a very, very straightforward way from the Angular team telling us which errors are in there. So the errors property is just filled up. Otherwise, it's null or it's not there. So we can see that in the demo, which we're opening in a few seconds. However, what we also get is CSS classes. So the Angular team also puts CSS classes on that specific control, depending on the state where it's in. So if you want to design your things, you can hook into this ngValid or ngInvalid or ngPending or something like that. And then you can add CSS classes on that just to make sure that, that you're displaying, like, I don't know, red circles anywhere or red lines and telling, hey, here's something going on. Please be specific with the error messages as we're there, because the user can't deal with like your telephone number is wrong. Please provide a format how the user has to type that in. I think we all like booked a flight and had to give our telephone numbers in an input field, and we all got it wrong in the first time, right? So this can drive you crazy. This can drive your customers really crazy if you're not getting specific error messages. So these are the built-in validators, but I know they are not, this is not enough, right? We do have custom validation inside all of our forms, right? So adding custom validation is as easy as adding the built-in validators, but we have to put a little bit more work in it. But basically, it's really, really interesting and easy how we can add this validator, because the only thing we have to do is we have to create a class which is called myCustomValidator, and we can declare a static method on it, which is called myValidator. And we're getting past the control from Angular, which is an abstract control. This was the base class we were talking about in the beginning. And on that control, we can check for the value, right? So the value is what the user typed in. And if control value is like this and that, and I don't know what, you can check it for yourself. And if it's wrong, so if the validator wants to tell the user, hey, there is something not correct inside of that form, we return an object with a property. And this property, you can name it, is just some property and it refers to true. And if everything is okay, you just return null, because you don't want the error to be added to the error property we have just seen. And what Angular will do is it will just enhance that error property with that property you provide here. In this case, this is SumProp. So you can check again if this SumProp is in the errors property and show a specific error message, right? So like I said, in the myValidator, we're getting past the control. You can check the value, return something if it's not okay. And if it's okay, we just return null. So this means everything is clear. Inside of our form group, we just can pass, beside the validators required, which are built-in validators, we just can make an array out of them, out of those validators required, and just can pass our custom validator without calling it, right? This is really important. We're just passing the method here, and we're not calling the method with the parentheses, because then we would have to pass an abstract control, and Angular is doing that by itself, right? So this is a synchronous validation. We're also having asynchronous validation, which puts the form in a pending state. And the asynchronous validation is basically the same. The only thing we have to do from the static method we are implementing a validator in is now that we're returning an observable thing. So here you can take the controlled value, like an email address, you can fire a request to the backend and just reflect it in your front end, then when it comes back, basically. And this returns an observable. All you have to do is, when you want to put them in, is beside the required and the myCustomValidator, which is myValidator, you can do another array behind of it, like the third argument in that array if you want to, and then you can put myCustomValidator, myAsync validator, and then it will just run asynchronously, and Angular knows, okay, I have to put the form in a pending state. This is all fun and games so far. I think that's not pretty complicated. However, when it comes to cross-field validation, things are really, really getting interesting, because now in cross-field validation, we have the case that maybe a field A wants to be validated when there is a specific value and field B has a specific value, the form is invalid. So form controls are depending on each other, and they have to be validated whether this thing is filled up or not. So if you put a zip code, you also have to put a city. And if you don't put it as got in a zip code, you don't have to put in a city, and this is not required. right? So this is a very, very interesting thing, which I had a lot in customers projects. So here what we can do is for the last name, we have the validators and required, and we have the custom validator, my validator, which is specific to a form control. However, if we want to validate multiple form controls, we can add configuration to that form, which you can see here on line 21 to 23. And there we can put validators, which are having the scope of the complete form group now. Right, so the errors are not put it at the form control, but they are put it at the form group. And then we can put on the form group level, we can ask for, hey, does that form group has that specific error for like field A and B are not matching together, right? So this is the power we have if we are providing validators on a form group level and not on a form control level, right? So a validator, cross-field validator, is basically slightly the same, but in this case, we are doing a class again, which is my form validator. We have a static form validator again. You can pass arguments if you want to now, maybe the fields which should be like validated or something, and it returns a validator function. It doesn't return a null or an object. So this is returning a function now, which we do here. So we're returning a function, and this function is getting past the complete form group. And inside of that form group, we return null if everything is okay, otherwise an object. And like I said, you can pass that form validator any values, like any string values where you want to put in the fields which should be validated to something, or like a threshold value should be over this and that, depending on what you want to validate. You're extremely flexible here because you have access to the complete group and, of course, to the forms. Because with FormGroup Get, you can access the form control specifically, and then you can say, okay, my control 1, control 2, and then you can ask for the values, and you can say, if this value is given, please provide this value and this error message, otherwise we're returning null. And inside of that validator function, it is really, really important that you, again, return a null or an object, whether you're okay or even not okay. So you can access the form controls, which we're seeing here, and then you're returning an object or you're returning null. So I would like to take a short look at an application I did. So what we're doing here, I won't do live coding right now. I know it's very entertaining for you, but I will switch to the branch master here. Let me just clean up my repository here. And then I will switch to the master branch and not to the live coding. And then we can see how cross-field validation can be done. So I have a form here. Let's take a look at that in the browser. So do an npm start here. Because I switched branches, it just killed me off. The Angular CLI doesn't like that very much. We've got 4 more minutes. I think we'll get it. I think we make it. So here's the form, right? And I have a first name, I have a last name. And now the room access, I'm requesting a room access. So if I'm like 20, I can access all the rooms, room 1, room 2, and room 3. But if I'm just like 17, I'm not over 18 for room 3. For this room, you have to be older than 80 years. So right now we're using that value and that value in combination to see whether the user has access to that room or not, basically. And if I would choose like room 2, it would also be fine. Room 1 is fine, right? Room 1 is totally okay. Room 2 is a room where I do not have access to, and room 3 as well. So how did I do that? First, we can just to make that a little bit more, a little bit bigger. And in our form component, this is available on GitHub. You can just check it there. I have the validators property. I'm doing my form group here, and I have the validators property, which is an array. And I have a restrict h validator. Restrict h validator is like the method. And here I'm calling it because I want to pass a threshold to it, right? So for cross-field validation, you can really pass arguments. And I'm giving the min h here, and I'm returning like a method. Which has the form group, and then I go to the H control, the room control. I'm doing slight checks here. If none of the controls is given, I'm returning null. Please give me the H value. This is just security checks, making sure that everything is all right. However, if I do not have a rooms value, I'm also returning null. But if the rooms value is room 2 and rooms value is room 3, and the h value is checked here on line 20, so it will return null if that is if the h value is bigger than the min h. And then I'm setting the h control, set errors provide min h to true. So what we are returning from that function is applied to the complete form. However, we can add specific errors to these specific controls. And this is exactly what I'm doing here. I'm taking the h control and I'm setting a specific error to that particular control inside of a form validator, of a cross-form validator. And this is a really important thing because this is one step, one flexibility you have more, one little power more you have inside of that cross-field validation. And I'm getting it. I'm setting the error of provide min h, and this is true, and I'm returning an object from that specific thing, which is the form scope again, which is room only with 18. In my template then, you can see that I'm putting the mat error field. If my form I'm getting the h field and the errors has a property provide min h, and then I'm just displaying an error message for the min h. And for the complete form, I'm just giving it room only with 18, and then I'm displaying the error message. So this is a very, very powerful thing which you can do. So you have the validation control level, and you have the validation on the cross control level or on the form level, if you will. All right, you can check out the example on GitHub. I'll give you the link afterwards. All right, I want to lose a few words about testing when we're coming at the end of the presentation, but I don't want to leave it unmentioned because testing is really easy if you have those validators. You can test your validators very easily. You just have to provide a form control. You put the value in what you would like it to have, and then you let it run through your validator. When you have it, like my validator, you're passing the form control, and you just can check for the result if the age is not valid, is true or not. Right, and the same we can do for the cross-control validation. So everything we have to do is we have to take a validator function now. So this is a function, this is not the property. Then we're just making a form group as we want to. This is the state we want to set a test into. Then we're calling that validator function with a form group, and we check it for not equal null because something has to be in it, or for the specific properties. And the same is, of course, when we want to have it to be, everything should be okay. So restrict age validator with 18. We're 20 now. We want to access to room 2. We're calling the validator function, and it's null, so everything should be fine. Another thing I would like to mention is the value changes. The value changes is really powerful, and you can access it from the form control and the form group. So here we can say my form.value changes. So if any of the value changes inside of your form, you are being notified with the subscribe. So this is just a stream, or you hook into a specific control, in this case, the first name. And if that value changes, please subscribe to it, do something with it. And then I can like react to it, like just filling a drop down if you entered a zip or something. So this is totally valid. Last but not least, let's shortly check on custom form controls. Custom form controls are nothing else than when you want to summarize or combine specific controls you have, and you want to put them into your form, and you want to provide like a form control name on it. So add block buttons, maybe these are t-shirt buttons with a size small, medium, large or something, which is also in the example on GitHub. And you want to summarize them, and they should always come together depending on where you put it into your form. So you have to implement, if you want to do this, you have to create a component, and you implement something like the control value accessor. This is just an interface. It just forces you to implement some methods. And when you do this, you also have to put the providers. So you do the ng value accessor, you are forward referencing it to your specific component, which combines that in the array, and you set the multi to true because you don't want to overwrite it. And then you can use that whole thing and you can bind something to it. So this is a pretty good way to combine like custom controls or multiple controls into one form control. Let's put a small recap on that. So we have seen the form group, the form control versus form array, what these different things are. We have seen the form builder. We have seen validation and how powerful it is. We have seen testing, which is very important to me, to be honest. We have the value changes and the rich API, and we have just announced or just seen the custom form controls. And I hope that there is only one question left, naming who's speaking here. So my name is Fabian Gosebrink. I'm a Google Developer Expert. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Pluralsight author. I'm very active in the community. These are the links where you can reach me out. This is my Twitter handle. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the app, into the chat. I'm happy to answer them. And last but not least, I wish you all to stay safe, stay sane, and I hope to see you again in person one day. Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting to hear you talk about Angular Forms. A lot of interesting stuff on it. Sadly, we won't have time to answer the questions that are actually on the chat on the stream, as our platform will shut this down for streaming pretty soon. But the chat will stay available, so you can just join the participants there and answer their question on the chat.
I will answer the question. Thank you.
So thank you all for joining this session, and see you in the next one.